Okay, so a couple of things to report. Number one, if you've never had the iced mocha from Lamppost Coffee down here in Round Rock, Texas, you're missing out. Secondly, if you've never played on the new Lodge live stream setup, you're also missing out. They put a ton of work into that thing and it looks beautiful. Today is my second day here in Round Rock. Yesterday I played some 5100 on stream. We'll get into that in a second. Today I am playing 5100 once again. Yesterday, the session was interesting, but unfortunately I wasn't in that many interesting spots. It's mostly card dead, which when you play for like only 4 or 5 hours, that's gonna happen from time to time. But still there were a few noteworthy hands, so let's get into those and then we'll cover day 2.
All right, guys, so a few quick hands to cover. In this first one, I raise it up with ace-10 suited from late position. Small blind re-raises to 1500, and with a suited ace, I make the call. Heads up to a flop, which comes down pretty good. It's ace, queen, deuce with 1 spade, so we've got top pair, as well as some backdoor flush and straight possibilities. When he bets small, I do nothing but call, and we see the 6 of clubs on the turn. This time he continues betting, and already it's not an ideal situation, since we could be up against pocket aces, pocket queens, and ace king, ace jack, you know, all these other hands that beat me. But at the same time, he could still have some bluffs, and I don't have any clubs, so if he's bluffing with a flush draw, we're obviously still ahead. So I call, and we see the 7 of clubs on the river. Not great, since now some of those backdoor flush possibilities do get there. This time he bets half pot. Pretty ugly spot right off the bat. On one hand, I've got one of the worst hands I would ever have in this position, so folding seems more than okay. But on the other, we're getting a really good price, and I've never played with this opponent before, so I'm not entirely sure if he's the bluffing type or not. As per usual, when a spot is close, I usually decide to just call, put chips in the pot, see what happens. And this time what happens is we lose against ace-king. Very well played by my opponent, and we are starting off the trip by losing a nearly $30,000 pot. However, we did not have to wait long to get involved in another big one. Next, I pick up pocket 6s, I make it 300, and that same player, Alex, re-raises. This time he's got position, makes it 1,000 to go. When it gets back to me with a pocket pair, I am going nowhere just yet. So off to a flop, which comes down above average, I'd say 6-6-4, giving me 4 of the same card. I know it's ridiculous to do what I'm about to do, but this is generally a board that's going to be better for me than for him. Could have a ton of bluffs, and he's going to miss quite often, so I decide to bet small, just like I would with a bunch of trash. This time, it's not trash, though. I'm happy to see my opponent calls, and we get the 7 of clubs on the turn. Could go either way now between continuing to bet or this time just check. And what I decide to do is check it. If he floated with any kind of trash on the flop, he's probably going to start bluffing now. And if he doesn't have a very strong hand, I don't think we can get multiple streets of value. So not exactly sure if this is the best route, but I decide to check, and my opponent checks it back. River is the king of diamonds, and I feel like my hand looks like a 1 pair type of holding, like a 4 or maybe a 7. You know, I was bluffing on the flop and turned a pair. And I think all those hands would want to bet small, kind of like a blocker bet. Obviously, this is to induce in this situation since I've got 4 of a kind. But I do decide to bet small, $800. Could also be getting away with some cheap bluffs for this price, such as 8-9 suited, for example. Anyway, my opponent doesn't think too long before doing exactly what I was hoping for and raising it up to $3,000. Seems to me like he's got a real hand at this point, or just a complete bluff, so I decide to check raise very large. If he's got a bluff, it doesn't matter how big I go, but if he's got something good, I'm expecting him to pay off, especially after that first hand we just played where he kind of owned me. So I do raise it up to $18,000, and I'm happy to see he does not snap fold. So turns out he does have something. As you guys can see, my opponent river to king, and I do not envy his situation. This is a pretty tough spot, if I'm being honest. Luckily for me, he thinks it over for a bit and ends up calling, so we turn over the quads and win a $40,000 pot, and just like that, we are back slightly above even. And the last interesting hand of this first day, DQ limps in, Mike raises to $500, and then Andrew Nemi, the vlog father, re-raises on the button with his pocket 7s. Action gets to me in the small blind, and I've got ace queen. Pretty good cards, but I don't really want to just cold call this re-raise from Andrew. I think the best course of action is to either fold, even though that's maybe a bit tight, or re-raise as a bluff, of course, with some removal to strong hands like ace, king, aces, queens. You get the idea. So this time I do take the aggressive route. I make it 4,000 to go. DQ folds. Mike thinks for a while and folds his pocket tens. But when it gets to Andrew, he is going nowhere just yet with his sevens, and we go heads up to a flop. 9-4 deuce rainbow seems maybe neutral, perhaps a little bit better for him since he's going to have pocket nines, whereas I wouldn't super often. But aside from that, I'm going to have all the overpairs, so I see no reason to slow down. I make it 2,300 to go, and Andrew calls. At this point, I think he could have all sorts of stuff, and that includes hands that have me in very bad shape, like pocket jacks, pocket queens, pocket kings, or even aces that he's slow playing, but also hands that float and aren't very strong. So when the 6 of clubs comes on the turn, I'm going to continue betting and try to target folds from that second category of hands, much like the one he actually has in this situation. Could go a few different ways here with sizing, but being that there were a bunch of raises pre-flop, I tend to bet smaller in those kind of situations. So I decided to continue betting for around 1/3 the size of the pot, trying to make it look like I'm setting up an all-in on the river. Luckily, we won't have to cross that bridge because Andrew lets his pocket sevens go. So a good result in this one.
Right, so not the most eventful session, as you guys saw. Only a few interesting spots, but can't complain. I ended up winning around 5,000 bucks, which of course is no small chunk of change. I'll happily take that any day. I do suspect, however, that today won't be quite as easy. I think I'll either lose or win significantly more money today, and that's enough to make this a worthwhile vlog, I think. So without any further ado, let's head back to the lodge. I'll show you guys around. First, I'm going to finish this delicious iced mocha, and hopefully this translates into a big win today. Let's go.
All right, guys, here we go again, back at the lodge for some 5,100. I sit with $100,000, and here's the first interesting hand of this day. I look down at pocket kings in early position, raise it up to $300. Brad Owen calls in late position, and then Nate Silver looks down at pocket aces. Not ideal when you have pocket kings that someone else has that hand, but let's see what happens. He re-raises it up to 1,500 bucks. When it gets back to me, of course, I'm going to raise myself. Occasionally calling, I think, is also fine, but this is not one of those times. I make it 4,000 to go, and after some thought, Nate decides to just call. Seems logical, considering he won't have a huge stack compared to the size of the pot, so getting all in won't be an issue. Flop comes down Jack 10-7 rainbow. Kind of have mixed feelings about this one. My opponent's going to have hands like ace king, ace queen suited, pocket queens, ace jack suited, you know, all sorts of stuff that we beat, but he's also going to have pocket jacks, pocket tens, and maybe even pocket aces sometimes. So I'm not in love with it, but I think all my hands are still okay just betting small in this situation. So that's what I do, 2,400, and Nate immediately rips it all in there. Well, not in love with the situation at this point. I feel like we could certainly be behind, but my hand is just way too strong to fold, especially since his all-in is really not for that much money compared to how much I've already put in. So I do eventually make the call, and he turns over the bad news. He's got pocket aces. We decide to run it once, and maybe, just maybe, we can get lucky against aces holding kings. I've been on the other end of that quite a few times, so I'm happy to take it, you know? Sure enough, the turn is the king of diamonds, and we turn top set. River is the 10 of diamonds, we make a full house, and we have officially cracked aces to start off this second stream. Things are going in the right direction. A few hours later, a similar situation develops where Nate opens to 600. This time yours truly is in the $200 straddle. Easy calls next to act, and I look down at ace king. Always a welcome sight in the straddle. I raise it up to 3,600. When it gets back to Nate, he decides he's had enough and rips it all in for around $20,000. Easy folds, and of course, I make the snap call. This time we decide to run it twice, and Ace King ends up being the best hand on both boards, so we once again win a big pot off of Nate. Running hot against him and running hot overall, as we are now up around $40,000. A few rounds later, this hand comes up where easy opens to $300, and I'm looking down at 10-4 of hearts on the dealer button. I don't really have a great excuse for you guys, but I decided to re-raise this one to $1,200. If I'm being honest, the raiser seemed a little bit weak, and I also have a good table image, so I figured I could get away with this. Not recommended, but just telling you guys how it went. Anyway, action gets back to easy, who makes the call, and we go heads up to a flop of 8 deuce deuce with 1 heart. Pretty dry board, one that I think I'll still have a lot of strong hands on, and my opponent will miss a lot. So when he checks, I bet small. And interestingly enough, he check raises from 800 to 2,000, so almost a min raise. I'm not really sure what's up with that, but it doesn't give me the impression he's got a very strong hand. I think maybe an 8 might play like this, or some sort of pocket pair, trying to see where he's at. Not entirely sure, but I decide to float and try to steal this one later on, hoping some overcards come to the 8 and I can try to represent some full houses and stuff. So I do put in the 2,000, and we see the Queen of Clubs on the turn. Of course, I still have nothing, but that card does give me an opportunity to try to win this pot. And sure enough, easy checks it over to me. So now it's my turn to bet. I decide on a size of $2,000, much like I would with a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 10s, for example. Easy makes the call, and we see the Jack of Spades on the river. He checks it again, and now it's time to either give up and check back, or bet yet again and pretend I've got something. Well, you guys can probably guess I am not checking back with 10 high. Pot's around $10,000, and if I bet now, it would represent either something very strong or nothing at all, so I think a big size makes the most sense. I thought about $15,000, but I kind of thought that it might look too fishy to this guy, and he might get curious for a size that big, so instead I just decide 10,000 is a good, nice number. I put in 2 pink chips worth 5K each. We don't get snap called, which is always nice, and he also doesn't look like he wants to raise. Seems like it's just time to wait and see. After a little bit, my opponent finally decides to fold. Barely though, so we get this one through. Gotta admit, it was painful though. In the next interesting hand, I open up King Jack suited from early position, and only Avi calls from the straddle, so heads up to a flop of 8-6-3 with 1 club. He checks, I bet $1,400, the size of the pot, and my opponent makes the call with middle pair. All pretty standard so far, I think. Turn card gives us some help. The King of Diamonds. Avi checks again, and of course, I'm going to continue betting. If I had any sort of bluff, I'd be doing the same thing, so I put in $1,500 this time, and I'm happy to see my opponent calls yet again. River card's interesting. It's the 8 of Spades, which pairs the top card on the flop, and I think it's very likely my opponent could play an 8 this way, but at the same time, another 8 coming out makes it less likely he's got an 8, if that makes any sense. It does to me anyway. My opponent checks a third time, and now we have a question between betting for value or just trying to get to showdown. And while I think checking back is okay, I decide to try to get some more value, hoping my opponent's got a hand like exactly what he's got, or maybe pocket 7s, really any sort of pair that just doesn't believe me. So after a few seconds, I put in another pink chip, $5,000 bet. My opponent thinks it over for a bit and eventually calls. That's good news. I turn it over and we win this one. In the next fun one, the straddle is on yet again. I raise it up to 600 with ace deuce of hearts. Easy calls in the big blind, and then boots squeezes from the straddle to $2,500. Action's back on me now, and considering that we're both pretty deep, I think small suited aces can make a good candidate for a pre-flop bluff. They've got good playability, and we could apply a lot of pressure since, like I said, we have so many chips behind. So I do decide to go for it this time. I make it $7,000 to go. Easy folds, and after some deliberation, boots makes the call. I think it's very obvious at this point we don't have the best hand, but I'm just hoping we can win this one post-flop. Comes down king, king 5 with 1 heart. Not bad. I could certainly have hands like ace, king, or maybe king, queen suited once in a while. And if my opponent's got an underpair to the king, or a hand like ace, queen, or ace, jack suited, he's not going to be in love with this situation. So when he checks, I decide to continue betting. Not really expecting to get it done with just 1 bet. So I put in a small one, $4,500. But luckily, Boots does end up letting go of his ace, queen high. Can't really blame him. And we take down this pot with not much resistance. In this next one, things get a little out of line yet again. Brad opens to $500. Easy re-raises to $1,300. Then it's on me in the straddle with pocket 9s. Rates to be the best hand most of the time, so I decide to put in a raise of my own. I make it 3,000 to go. Brad folds, but Easy makes the call, so heads up to a flop of 5-3-3 rainbow. Very good board for my pocket nines, so I decide to continue betting. I make it 2,000, and much to my surprise, Easy raises to 5,000. Not entirely sure what this means. I guess he could be playing some pocket pairs this way, and that might be bad news since he could certainly have hands like tens, jacks, maybe even queens. But at the same time, we could still be ahead, and it's not much more money. So I call, and we see the 7 of spades on the turn. Not in love with this card since now we're beating even less hands. 6-4 suited, which was the most obvious draw on the flop, now makes a straight, and pocket sevens, of course, also take the lead. I check, and this time he bets 10,000 US dollars. Once again, not really the best situation, but I've got an overpair and still beating at least some hands. I think like ace-5 suited, pocket sixes, for example. And Easy has been playing a lot of hands, so I don't necessarily think we're beat just yet. He could occasionally have turned a flush draw as well, although not really sure how often he's raising hands that contain 2 spades on this flop. Anyway, off to a river, which is just bad to worse. It's the ace of spades. Now we're beating even less hands. Any random ace highs that he was bluffing with, any turned flush draws, and of course, that's if we were ahead to begin with. Like I said, he could still have 6-4, any 3 like ace-3 suited or 3-4 suited, pocket 5s, pocket 3s, pocket 7s, yada yada. I check it. This time he bets somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 or $35,000, and at this point, I am just done with it. And it turns out we got completely wrecked as Easy happily flips over the king-jack unsuited. Very nice play from my opponent, and this one does not work out. This next hand here is probably my favorite from the entire night. All right, here we go. So Avi limps in, the straddle is on yet again, and I'm next to act with 8-6 of spades. Good enough to isolate, I think, so I make it $1,000 to go. Ifan on my left calls, and then Avi calls as well. So we're going to go 3 ways to this flop, which is, as you guys might call it, an action flop. Queen, 7, 4, 2 spades. So I've got a flush draw, a gut shot straight draw, and both of my opponents have top pair, top kicker. Of course, I have no way of knowing this, so when Avi checks to me, I continue betting, make it $2,000 to go. Ifan calls, and Avi calls as well. Not great news. At this point, I'm probably shutting down. I guess it depends on the turn card. But bam, I am not shutting down on this one. It's the 5 of diamonds giving me the very disguised nuts. That's right, I've got the best possible hand on this board, and it's a turn card where neither of my opponents I expect will be folding too often. So when Avi checks, this time I continue betting for $6,000, trying to get some value. And I'm happy to see Ifan calls. And now Avi starts thinking about it for a while as well, so things are looking great. Unfortunately, Avi ends up letting go of his ace-queen of clubs, which I gotta admit is a pretty sweet fold, but it matters not. We are heads up, looking for a clean river card. At this point, I would like not to make a flush, since that might let my opponent off the hook. And luckily, that's exactly what ends up happening as it comes to the jack of clubs. A complete brick, and it's the green light for us to continue trying to get some value. I've played with Ifan a few times, and he's usually got strong hands once he starts calling me down. So luckily for me, that means I can go pretty big in terms of trying to get some value. That's exactly what I do. Pots around 20,000, I put in $24,000. He doesn't love it, but after a few seconds, he does decide to call with his top pair, top kicker. Can't really blame him. There's quite a few draws that ended up missing, but unfortunately for him, this time I've got it, and we win a nearly $70,000 pot. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last interesting hand of the night. At this point, we're playing 50, 100, 200, 400. That's right. As you guys can see, Doug Polk is in the game, and those things tend to happen when he plays. Anyway, in this one, action folds to me in the small blind. I've got pocket 5s. I open it up for 2,000 and get called by Doug in the straddle and JL, who limped in late position. 3 ways to a flop of 6-6-3. Not bad for pocket 5s. I think checking is probably best, but I decided to bet small this time, $2,000. Doug makes the call with his flopped bottom pair, and JL, as you guys can see, has flopped himself 3 of a kind. He calls, and we see the queen of diamonds on the turn. So still 3 ways. This time I decide to check, exercise some pot control, see what these guys want to do. Doug checks as well. JL does not. He puts in a bet of $8,000. Action's back on me, and I think you can already kind of make a case for folding, but I don't see what he could possibly be playing this way that isn't an absolute monster. You guys know it's hard to make those hands. If he's got a 6 or pocket 3s, good for him, but I'm not done with it just yet. I'm going to keep this guy honest. I make the call. Doug gets out of the way, so heads up to a river, which is not ideal. It's the ace of diamonds, so now any hands that floated on the flop, turn to flush draw, and try to bluff, now obviously improve to a flush. He could also have hands like a random 4-5 or 7-5, maybe, I don't know, 7-4 suited. Seems unlikely. The problem with my exact hand is that it has removal to a lot of the cards I'd want him to have if he was bluffing. Well, I guess I'm just referring to 4-5 suited, for example. Anyway, without getting too nerdy, I check it again, and JL announces all in. Tough spot. I know maybe it looks like it's not, but I doubt he's got a queen or an ace, so I'm immediately discounting those. And if he's got a backdoor flush, well, those are tough to make as well. I guess what I'm saying is I think this bet only represents a very, very strong hand or a complete airball. I've never played with this guy before, so I'm not entirely sure if he's got that in him. A lot of players aren't really willing to jam all in on the river with absolutely nothing, so that's definitely something I'm considering. But at the same time, it's very hard to flop a full house or 3 of a kind, and if he doesn't have those hands, then I've got the winner, right? I don't know. Looking back, I feel like this is a pretty straightforward fold. My hand is just pretty terrible to call with. But at this point, I'd been playing for around 12 hours. And my brain is a little bit fried, not firing on all cylinders. So hope you guys can excuse me for taking my time on this one. However, I do eventually end up deciding on a fold. And I'm happy to see that that was the correct decision, because this could have been disaster if I got a little bit too curious. Anyway, that was the last interesting one of the night. As always, I hope you all enjoyed the hands. Okay, just finished playing for around 12 hours on stream, which is by far the longest I've ever played on a stream. They're still actually going. I think they're planning on going like 16 or 17 hours, which normally I'd be happy to be a part of, but I've got a flight in like 6 or 7 hours back to LA because I'm on the Hustler stream tomorrow, or later today, I should say, since it's like, what is that? Can you guys see that? Is that focusing? It's like 3:30 in the morning. I'm really glad that I was able to have a seat in that game, because I feel like that was a historic stream for sure. You know, it's their new studio. Doug Polk jumped in the game later on. They're going for a record time of 17 or 18 hours. Brad Owen was in the game, a legend of the poker world. It was just an all-around memorable night, and luckily I came out ahead. Ended up winning around $35,000, which, all things considered, I am more than happy with. I think I was up more at some point, you know, maybe a few different points throughout the night, but that's okay. That's how it goes. Overall, I was pretty happy with how I played, especially considering that, you know, mental fatigue sets in around hour mark 7 or 8 for myself. But I think I hung in there well and navigated spots in a not terrible way. So yeah, I'll take it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this vlog. It definitely came out a lot crazier than I expected it to, but you know, it's for the best, I think. All right, that's it for now. I gotta get some sleep and get to the airport. I will see you guys for the next vlog back from LA. Thank you to everyone at Lodge for having me, and until next time, good luck at the tables. Peace.